I need to tell you something before this story begins. I need to tell you that the man who walked through my front door on a Tuesday afternoon in March was my husband. Same face, same hands, same way of standing in a doorway with his weight slightly to the left that I had memorized over 8 years of watching him walk through doorways. My husband, and I did not know him, not completely, not in the way I had known him before he left. Something had been rearranged in the 14 months he was gone, something internal. Something that did not show on the outside until you got close enough to feel the specific temperature of him. And then you understood immediately that you were standing beside someone who had been through something that had changed the shape of who they were. I had been waiting for him for 14 months. I had been counting days, sending packages, writing letters that I was never sure he had time to read. Being the person on this end of a deployment who does all of the waiting and the worrying and the specific, grinding management of a life that is supposed to be two people's life but is currently only one person's. I had been waiting for my husband, and when he walked through that door I understood, within the first hour, that the waiting was not finished. It was just beginning a different chapter. What happened over the 8 months after he came home? The night he finally told me the truth about what he had seen and what it had done to him. And what I said that night that neither of us expected is the story I want to tell you today, but I cannot tell you any of it without telling you who we were before he left, and I cannot tell you who we were before he left without starting at the very beginning. If you are new here, please subscribe right now and drop your country and local time in the comments. I read every single one. Now let me take you all the way back. My name is Maya Holloway. I am 36 years old. My husband's name is James. He is 38. He has been in the United States Army for 15 years. He enlisted at 23. After 2 years of college that he describes as clarifying. In the specific way that 2 years of college are clarifying when what you actually want is structure and purpose and something larger than yourself to be part of. I met James at 24, 2 years into his service. He was stationed at Fort Bragg and I was working as a high school English teacher in Fayetteville, North Carolina. We met at a friend's barbecue in July, a specific Saturday afternoon that I remember, with the specific clarity of someone who did not know at the time that it was going to be important, but somehow felt it anyway. He was quiet at that barbecue. Not shy, there is a difference. Present and observant in the way of someone who has been trained to pay attention to everything in a room but who also knows how to make that attention feel like warmth rather than surveillance. He asked me what I was reading. We talked for 2 hours while the barbecue happened around us. Before he left, he asked for my number with the specific directness of a man who is not accustomed to uncertainty. I gave it to him. We dated for 2 years. He was deployed for 5 months of those 2 years. We managed the distance the way military couples manage distance, with intentionality and letters, and the specific discipline of two people who have decided something is worth the difficulty of the doing. We got married at 26 and 28 respectively. A small ceremony in Fayetteville with the people we loved most and the specific beautiful simplicity of two people who know what they want and do not need the ceremony to be anything other than honest. I want to tell you about our marriage before the deployment because the before matters to the after. We were good together. Not perfect. James had a tendency to internalize things I needed him to say out loud, and I had a tendency to push for the saying before he was ready. And we had learned over years of marriage to negotiate the space between those two tendencies with varying degrees of grace. But good, genuinely, substantially good. He knew how I took my coffee. I knew the specific sound of his breathing when he was worrying about something he had not told me yet. He read every book I recommended even when they were not his natural territory. I learned enough about the Army to ask real questions rather than general ones. We were a team. Two people who had decided to be a team and had been showing up for that decision every day for 8 years. Then the orders came. James had been deployed twice before, once for 7 months before we met, once for 9 months in our second year of marriage. I knew what deployment was. I knew the specific texture of it. The goodbye at the airport, the first week of radical quiet in the house, the adjustment into a different rhythm, solo decisions, solo evenings, the solo management of a life built for two. I knew all of that. What I did not know, what you cannot know until it is the specific deployment rather than the general concept of deployment, is how 14 months feels different from 7 or 9. 7 months is long. 9 months is very long. 14 months is a different thing altogether. 14 months is long enough for both people to become slightly different people. Not intentionally, not dramatically, but incrementally, in the specific way that time and experience change people whether they are aware of it or not. James left in January. Our daughter Nora was 4. She understood that Daddy was going somewhere important and would be back, but did not have the developmental capacity to hold 14 months as a concept. For her it was simply an ongoing state of waiting that she managed, the way 4-year-olds manage things, with bursts of missing and bursts of forgetting, and the specific resilience that children have before the weight of things teaches them that resilience requires effort. I managed the house. I managed Nora. I managed my teaching. I managed the specific, daily work of being the person on this end, the one who does not know where exactly the other person is, who reads news carefully for geography, who keeps a normal face for a child who is watching her mother's face for information about how frightened to be. James and I spoke when we could. Not as often as I would have needed, and more often than the previous deployments had allowed. The calls were not always easy, the connection was unreliable, the time zones difficult. And there was always the specific thing that happens on deployment calls where each person is managing what they are saying as much as saying it. He was protecting me from things. I was protecting him from things. We were both doing it with love, and it was also, I understood later, part of how the gap opened. He came home in March. The homecoming was everything homecomings are in the movies, and also nothing like the movies. Nora ran to him. He caught her and held her for a long time with his eyes closed, and when he opened them they were wet in a way I had rarely seen from him before. He is not a man who cries easily. He cried in that airport. He held me for a long time after Nora had released him. Long enough that I could feel his breathing, the specific rhythm of it, the one I knew, but with something underneath it that I could not name yet. We drove home. Nora fell asleep in her car seat within minutes. James drove. I sat in the passenger seat and looked at his profile and felt the specific, complicated mixture of relief and joy and the thing I could not name underneath it. He was home. Something was different. The first weeks were what military families call the honeymoon period and what I call the period of managed distance. He was there, physically present, sleeping beside me, at the dinner table, helping Nora with her bath, present in all the visible ways. But there was a quality to the presence that I felt rather than saw, a slight removal, a slight glass between us quality that I told myself was adjustment and readjustment and the expected difficulty of reintegration after 14 months. I had read about PTSD. I had attended the family readiness briefings. I knew the vocabulary. I knew the statistics. I knew, in the way of someone who has done her research and prepared herself carefully, what the potential landscape looked like. What I did not know was how to be with it when it was my husband and not a case study. James did not sleep well. I had known this about him since the second deployment, but it was more pronounced now. He woke often, sometimes abruptly, and when he woke he would get up quietly and go to the living room, and I would hear him there in the dark. And I would lie in bed and decide each time whether to go to him or to leave him the space he seemed to be choosing. I left him the space more often than I went to him, because when I went to him he was gentle and present, but also clearly not ready, and I did not want to push into something before he could receive me there. He drank more than he had before the deployment. Not dramatically. He had never been a heavy drinker, a beer or two on weekends, a glass of wine at dinner. Now it was more. Not alarmingly more to someone who did not know the before. But I knew the before. He was shorter with Nora sometimes. Not unkind. James is constitutionally incapable of unkindness to his daughter, but with less patience than he had had before. The specific endless patience of a father who delights in every question and every tangent and every 5-year-old's need to explain everything in complete detail. That was thinner. He noticed when it was thinner. He would leave the room briefly and come back, and the patience would be reconstructed. But the effort of the reconstruction was visible. To me, even when it was not visible to Nora. He would not talk about what had happened. I did not push. The briefings had told me not to push. My own instincts told me not to push. I waited. The waiting was the hardest thing I have ever done. Harder than the 14 months. Because the 14 months I was waiting for his return. These months I was waiting for him to come back from somewhere inside himself that I could not see or reach. Month for after his return I suggested therapy, not demanded, suggested, with the specific care of someone who has thought about how to say a thing for several weeks and has finally decided the saying cannot be delayed further. He said he was fine. I said, James, I know you. I have known you for 12 years. You are not fine. I am not asking you to be fine. I am asking you to talk to someone who can help you with what is not fine. He was quiet. Not because something is wrong with you, I said. Because something happened to you. Those are different things. He looked at me. I don't want to talk about it, he said. I know, I said. But the not talking about it is taking up space in this house. In our bed. At our dinner table. With our daughter. And I need you to understand that the not talking is not neutral. It has weight. And we are all carrying it. He did not respond that night. 3 days later he told me he had made an appointment. Therapy helped. Not immediately. Not in the linear way that the word helps implies. It helped the way most real things help, unevenly, imperfectly. With setbacks and with progress that was sometimes invisible until you looked back from a distance and understood it had been happening all along. He went twice a week for 6 months. Sometimes he told me things from the sessions. Sometimes he did not. I learned to receive what he offered without pressing for more. The drinking decreased. The sleep improved slowly. The patience with Nora began to rebuild, but there was still the thing I could not name. The specific something that sat between us, and not hostility, not distance exactly, but a withholding of a specific kind that I felt as clearly as I felt his warmth in the same moments. There was something he had not told me. Not something he was hiding from me. I want to be precise about that distinction because it matters enormously. Hiding implies a decision to conceal. This was different. This was something he had not yet found the capacity to say. Something too large or too specific or too close to whatever was at the center of what had happened to him to be brought into ordinary language yet. I knew it was there. I waited for it. It came 8 months after his return. On a Sunday evening in November. Nora was asleep. James and I were sitting on the back porch. The night was cool, that specific November cool that is not yet winter but is finished with autumn. He had a glass of whiskey he had been nursing for an hour. I had tea. He had been quiet all evening. Not the comfortable quiet we had always been capable of. The weighted quiet of someone approaching something from the inside. I did not break it. Then he said, I need to tell you something. I said, okay, I don't know if I can. He said, you don't have to do it all at once. I said, you can start anywhere. He looked at his glass for a long moment. Then he said, there was a night. 7 months in. We were. It doesn't matter where exactly. There was a night and there was a kid. Not one of ours. The other side. 17, maybe. 18. I can't. I've tried to remember his face clearly and I can't. But I remember his hands. He had small hands. He stopped. I did not move. I did not speak. I held the space for him the way I hold space for my students when they are trying to say something that is hard to say. He didn't make it, Jane said. And I was there. I was the reason he didn't make it. That's what I do. That's the job. I know that. I have always known that. But this one, he stopped again. The night was very quiet around us. He had small hands, James said again. And I have been seeing them every night for 14 months. Every single night. I see them and I think about whether he had a mother. Whether she is somewhere wondering. Whether he could not finish the sentence. I watched my husband, my strong, disciplined, deeply good husband, come apart. At the edge of something he had been carrying. Alone for 14 months and the months before that. I set my tea down. I moved from my chair to his. I sat beside him on the arm of his chair and I put my arm around him and I held on. I did not say it was okay. It was not okay. I did not say he had been doing his job. He knew he had been doing his job. I did not say anything for a long time. Then I said, I am here. I have you. You are not alone with this anymore. He leaned his head against mine. We sat on that porch for 2 hours. He talked and then he didn't talk and then he talked again. Not coherently. Not in the organized way he usually communicated things. In the specific and structured way of someone releasing something that has been under pressure for too long. I held on. That is all I did. I held on. Something shifted after that night. Not everything. Not immediately. But something fundamental, the specific thing that had been between us. The withholding I had felt for 8 months. The glass between us quality that lifted. Not because the thing he had told me was resolved. It was not resolved and it will not be resolved in the way that clean endings suggest. What had happened to James, what he had done and seen and carried, was not something that resolves. It is something that becomes integrated over time. With the help of therapy and the help of truth and the help of someone who will sit with you on a November porch and hold on. His therapist called what happened that night a breakthrough. I understand why, but the word feels too clinical for what it was. What it was James trusting me with the heaviest thing he carried, and me being there to hold it. I want to tell you about the months after that November evening because I think they are the most important part of this story. James continued therapy. He joined a veterans support group, something he had resisted for months and finally agreed to try when his therapist suggested that the specific experience of being understood by people who had been in the same places was different from being supported by people who loved him but could not fully understand. He was right. And it helped. A different kind of help from what I could offer. I had been what he needed in the moment of the telling. The group became what he needed for the ongoing. He began sleeping through the night more consistently. Not every night, but more. He began to come back to himself in ways that were both gradual and sudden. Moments where I would look at him across the dinner table and see the James the first had known before the deployment looking back at me. And then other moments where I could see the James who had been through 14 months looking back instead. And I understood that both of those Jameses were real and both of them were mine and the marriage was big enough to hold both. Maura noticed. Children always notice. She started asking for daddy for the specific things she had stopped asking for during the first months, the bedtime stories that went on too long, the extra pushes on the swing. The particular game they had invented together before he left that had stalled and now restarted. He was coming back. Not back to who he had been before. People who have been through what James has been through do not come back to exactly who they were. They come back to a different version of themselves. A version that has been changed by what it carried. But a version that is still them. Still him. My husband. There is something I want to say about the 14 months before the return and the 8 months after it. I was asked by a friend who knew some of what we had been through whether I had been angry, whether I had resented the deployment, whether I had struggled with the version of James who came home. I told her the truth. Yes, all of those things. I had been angry, not at James, not at the army in any simple way, but at the specific unfairness of a situation in which the people I loved most were asked to pay costs that nobody who had not paid them could fully understand. I had been angry at the nights alone and the decisions made alone and the weight of being the only adult in a house where a child was watching me for information about how frightened to be. I had resented things. The drinking, the withdrawal, the specific way the 8 months felt longer in some ways than the 14 because during the 14 I knew what I was waiting for and during the 8 I was waiting for something I could not name. I had struggled every day. The specific, grinding, non-dramatic struggle of someone who loves someone who is not yet able to receive that love in the way they need it to be received and who has to hold the love anyway until the receiving becomes possible. All of that was true. And also true was this: I would do it again. Not because it was not hard. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. Not because it did not cost me. It cost me more than I have the full accounting of yet. But because James, on the other side of all of it, is here, present, in therapy, in the group, at the dinner table with Nora who asks for him by name for the specific things she wants, in our bed beside me, sleeping better than he was. Still not always well but better. Here. And here. With all the complexity of what here means and what it cost to get here is the thing I would do all of it again for. I want to say something to anyone listening who is on this end of a deployment, who is doing the waiting and the worrying and the management of a life built for two that is currently running on one. What you are doing is not invisible even when it feels invisible. The specific, daily, unacknowledged work of holding things together. While someone you love is somewhere you cannot reach, that work is real and it matters and it costs something. Real, and you are allowed to know that. You are also allowed to struggle, to be angry, to grieve the version of your life that the deployment has interrupted, to feel all of it without it meaning that you are not strong or not committed or not the right person for this. Strength is not the absence of feeling. Strength is feeling everything in, holding on anyway. You're holding on. That is enough. And to anyone who has come home carrying something they have not yet found the words for, to anyone who is sitting in a house with people who love them and cannot yet let those people fully in, I want you to hear what James told me 6 months after the November porch. He said, "The night I told you was the night something started to get lighter. Not fixed, lighter, and lighter is where everything else begins. Lighter is where everything else begins. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Have you ever held on when holding on was the only thing you knew how to do? Have you ever sat with someone in the dark and not tried to fix the dark, just stayed in it with them? And have you ever watched someone you love find their way back from somewhere you could not follow them, and understood that the watching, and the waiting, and the holding on was exactly what they needed you to do?" Drop the word porch in the comments if this story reached something real in you. And if you are new here, subscribe. Every single day I share a new story about family, about love, about the people who held on and the people who came back. I will see you in the next one. Kayla's Dark Truth.